Alright guys, welcome back to another episode of Assemble. My name's Hyverler, and I hope you guys have been enjoying Kate today. I hope you're enjoying the Kate coverage today. And to kind of top it all off, we have a AMA on Reddit with the lead combat designer Vince Napoli. So for you guys who don't know what an AMA is, it's Ask Me Anything. So you go in, you ask a question, and if it's something that Vince sees or it's something that he wants to answer, he'll go and answer it. So the way this video is going to work is I'm going to just kind of jump cut for every question. There's quite a few of them. So, there's going to be a little bit of detail here. Lots of things to talk about, lots of things to explore. So with that being said, let's just kind of get right into the first question. All right, so the first one is, any chance we would have more mechanic-based bosses instead of full-on DPS rush in the future? Vince answers, yeah, definitely. One of the areas I'd personally hope to get farther with before ship, which is shipping the game, was the idea of really intricate and complex challenges that involve using the full arsenal of the hero's abilities and really leaning into some of the specific nuanced roles that we tried to build. The upcoming Super Adaptoid Omega level threat is just a jumping off point for the combat team, being able to create much more dynamic encounters like I'm talking about. Well, that's good. I mean, I think that's one of the things that everyone kind of talks about, right? You get to the boss, and whether you're Jon Snow in Twitch chat who can one clap them, or you're a team and you're just kind of like hit dodge hit, and then melt, done. Like, I think everyone kind of understands that more mechanics, more encounters that provide different ways to do things or different ways to kind of go at a boss, not a bad thing. So definitely excited for this one. So great question, great answer, and definitely off to a good start here. All right, so the next question is, do you have plans to add more hero combo moves like Cap reflecting the Unibeam? I know there's a lot of potential, like Thor throwing his hammer at Cap's shield to create a massive boom, like we've seen in Endgame. The short answer is yes. The more, I guess you could say, professional answer is that there are a lot of things that a team really wants to do that end up not lining up with the schedules and releases. But the beauty of a game like this is that expanding the game is one of our core ideas. So in addition to adding new characters with new skills and abilities, expanding the existing lineup with new ability skills, perks, etc. has been and still is part of our plans. Really exciting. I mean, I know we've all seen the glitch, or well, most of us should have seen the glitch by now, where Cap's really like he's having Mjolnir in his hand. Maybe there's something to do with that. Maybe they're testing some things out. Some things got glitched into the build of the game. I mean, lots of cool things can be added. So this is definitely great stuff here. I mean, I think what we're going to get from this AMA specifically is that there's a lot of things that the combat team wants to do, but just for one reason or another hasn't been able to implement yet. But I mean, as Vince said it, one of the good things about a game as a service or an online game or a live service game, however you want to call it, is that over time you can refine, you can add, you can change, characters' abilities and whatnot to kind of respond to that feedback. So I know personally for me, if they can do more of this, great. Absolutely great. We'll love to see it. Okay, so for the next question is, would it be possible to add an air dodge mechanic for heroes who don't fly for the original 6 and grounded characters moving forward? Updating existing characters is definitely something we want to do, and we've definitely heard and discussed that type of feedback. To be honest, sometimes it is more about figuring out the right method of introducing updates like this. As much as I'd love to just go add stuff to characters constantly, we want to make sure that those more fully featured kind of updates have a rhyme and a reason to them, especially when there's stuff we'd obviously like to fix and address for all the characters. It's tough to just toss stuff like this in piecemeal, but as I hope people notice with Kate Bishop and soon Clint's designs, we have definitely learned a lot from feedback. I mean, one of the things that I think I've heard from so many people is that there's some meat to Kate's, kind of character and animations, and there's so much there that it really does feel like they've learned from the original 6. They've learned from our feedback, and obviously if they can take that feedback and implement it into what they did with Kate, Clint, Black Panther, She-Hulk, like obviously I think what's going to happen is, I don't know if it's going to be power creep essentially, but you're definitely going to see these new characters have new tools, new designs, new gadgets, all new stuff, and then they'll have to eventually go back and kind of update. So maybe it is like power creep, but I think that's just kind of the way some things work with these games. Like, obviously as you learn more, you do more, you can kind of figure some stuff out. New characters will kind of sort of be better in their new way, and then you go back and update the existing ones. So obviously when he mentions Kate Bishop and soon Clint's designs, definitely going to be some good stuff going forward. Great question, great answer again. All right, next question. What was the most difficult combat move to put in the game? If there is one, of course. So here's the answer. Obviously, it's hard to easily pin down the most difficult just because difficult can mean anything from balance to engineering to bug fixing, etc. I'd have to say the Hulk being able to carry and wield 2 enemies and Kamala being able to manually toss, grab, and drag enemies around are 2 of the mechanics that most worried me as someone who's done this for a bunch of years now. Pretty much every game I've worked on, those kind of interactions are always what everyone tries to avoid, and pretty much talk designers and creative directors out of just because of the complexity and time it takes to do it. So I have to say that I'm still pretty impressed with the animation, engineering, and design guys at Crystal for not even balking at that once and just going for it. Okay. I mean, I don't know anything about game design, but I mean, as someone who's done it for years, if that's kind of, what his answer is, I mean, it's stuff that I don't even think about, right? I just kind of think about the game. I don't think about like the work that goes into it and all the stuff that they have to play in and execute and design. Like, so it's obviously really nice personally to kind of get an inside look into things that go on. Because as an outsider, I don't really, know a lot of the work that goes on. I just see kind of the end results. So definitely cool to kind of get a peek in the curtain, so to speak. You know what I mean? All right. So next one here. Let's skip to the next one. All right. So the next question is, thank you for doing this, Mr. Napoli. I loved your work in God of War, and I really appreciate the time and effort that is going to this AMA and the game in general. I love this game, but I always am getting trapped in a corner by a bunch of enemies that stagger me until I get killed. Do you have any tips to avoid this or get out of it when it does happen? Also, is there any way for the enemy AI to get at least adjusted a bit in a patch so that it's easier to get out of the corners when a ton of enemies are attacking you at once? Thanks in advance. Have a wonderful day. All right, so the answer is, hey, thanks. Really appreciate that. Stun locking is pretty much the toughest thing to deal with for any type of third-person action game, I find. Most of the really solid third-person combat systems have their roots in 2D fighting games, and at a really low level, we tend to still create and balance the systems around the idea of hit frames and recovery frames. Obviously, the big issue with a really complicated and massive combat system like Marvel's Avengers is when you factor in the size and the shape of the encounters, and then factor in additional heroes, whether they're companions or player-driven. It becomes a lot more challenging to find the right balance. With that said, we're not only looking at constantly managing and tuning the AI systems in new ways to find a better balance here, but we're also talking about how we can tweak the hero mechanics as well to better accommodate for this kind of stuff. The scenario you describe is not something we ever intend to happen under ideal circumstances, but given the complexity and the sandboxy nature of the system, it happens way more often than it should, or than we'd like it to for sure. In terms of tips, it's a little nuanced and doesn't solve all the problems, but we do allow evading/defending earlier than we allow attacking out of the hit reactions. So if you're defending/evading, you can recover faster than if you're just trying to run away or counterattack. Again, it doesn't solve all those situations, but it does help. And he puts down at the bottom, also, I apologize for terrible formatting, trying to fix as I go. It's all good. All good. All right. I mean, hopefully that tip also can help you guys. I know for myself, there was one week I was doing the Mega Hive, and it just kept happening over and over again. Very frustrating to deal with. Hopefully they can figure something out. But in the meantime, kind of a stopgap solution. All right. So the next question. First off, thank you for my favorite combat system in any video game. I love how dynamic it is and how versatile you can feel with different builds. I'm just wondering if you guys ever thought of expanding the current abilities/capabilities of each hero. Example, giving Widow the wall run ability for extra flair, giving Kamala the ability to throw enemies like Hulk can, etc. It would be awesome to see the hero's capabilities evolve, smiley face. Vince answers, hey, thanks a lot. It's really awesome to hear, and I know other combat guys who are still working hard every day on new and existing heroes, enemies, and villains. Really appreciate hearing that kind of stuff. And yep, just like I said, we're still working on the existing heroes. And, like I've mentioned elsewhere, expanding the current roster has always been something we planned on and are planning on doing in addition to expanding the current roster. At the risk of being struck down by the PR gods, additional levels, skills, and abilities for the existing roster is absolutely in the cards for our plans, and the stuff you're talking about is exactly the kind of things we'd love to add. All right. Just more, just more of him kind of saying, changes are coming. We'll add stuff. We'll kind of keep these characters evolving and growing, and hopefully, there's more flair and flavor to them as the game moves on. Definitely good stuff there. All right, next question. What are the challenges of merging a satisfying, mechanically complex, skill-based combat system with loop-based progression? And how have these two different design philosophies affected enemy and encounter design? All right, so his answer starts, as I'm sure you can imagine, this is a pretty complex question. I could probably ramble on about this topic for ages, but I suppose I'll try and wrangle myself. So I guess to start, the idea of an action RPG, as I think a lot of fellow combat game nerds know, is one of those terms that has been thrown around for a long, long time. And it's always been somewhat notorious for representing the sort of unattainable holy grail-ish combination of skill-based gameplay combined meaningful progression. So to be completely honest, one of the toughest challenges is that historically there has been a lot of games to reference or learn from. Of course, there have been some amazing games that have managed to strike a great balance, but it is such a nuanced genre that you really do have to do a lot of experimentation during development to try and find what balance works best for your specific mechanics. The way I've approached it in the past and with Marvel's Avengers is to really start with skill aspect and develop the mechanics and character's ability in a vacuum, for a lack of a better word. The best way to think of it is like you're building the theoretical perfect matchup of an enemy and a player. In the case where all the statistics line up, what do you want that experience to be like? You need a baseline somewhere, so I think approaching it like that is key, because otherwise it can get so complex that you can just get totally lost trying to balance too many things at once. Once you have that baseline, the next challenge is to work backwards from where you would want the extremes of the encounters / combat scenario to go to and start coming up with the math that makes that scenario work, rather than the other way around. What I mean by that is, if you got a baseline combat scenario where, say, an enemy is going to die with 2 full combos, you basically want to consider what the quickest and longest version of that encounter is going to be that can still feel satisfying. It is trickier than it sounds because obviously, if you settled on a certain baseline, straying too far in one direction or the other totally changes the intent. But on the other hand, you have to consider that in order to make a satisfying RPG / progression system, one of, if not the most important aspects, is making sure that you actually feel the changes. For example, if it takes 5 hits to kill an enemy, a combo let's say, and you make it so that the stats allow you to increase damage by 25%, there's a good chance they'll still take 5 hits to kill the enemy, effectively rendering the benefits of the stats completely invisible. And of course, the same concept applies to player defense as well. If I die in 5 hits from an enemy and increase my defense a bunch, but it still works out so I die in 5 hits, even though the bonus is there and you're getting the effects from it, it might as well be non-existent if it doesn't really impact the bottom line. Now, obviously, those kind of issues are a challenge with any game system that has loop-based progression, but you're creating a game system where taking damage or dealing damage to enemies is not a foregone conclusion and technically relies entirely on player ability / execution to begin with. The impact of any changes on the result become a lot more tangible, meaningful results that you can feel. In terms of how the action RPG merging has affected encounter and enemy designs, to be completely honest, I'd say that it has created a scenario in which we're still actively adapting and changing our designs in order to try and find the right balance. I know for me personally, one of the areas I am most concerned with but at the same time excited about is creating some really challenging and nuanced supervillain encounters that take into account both player skill and loop progression in really interesting and dynamic ways. It's something that I feel like there's so much potential to explore and push, and we have just barely been able to scratch the surface of it. Maybe it's just my personal preference as an action RPG or action game / RPG nerd myself, but I would really like to explore a lot more nuance in Marvel's Avengers when it comes to making use of the loot / progression system against enemy encounters. And while we spend a considerable amount of time working on developing the kind of systems and mechanics like I mentioned above, we're still working through some of the challenges that come with the merging of the systems, and while I'll admit it's still pretty daunting as a developer, as a player and fan, I'm excited for what's to come. This is a great answer here. I mean, obviously, one of the things to stand out for me personally is that they would really like to explore a lot more nuance when it comes to like the loot progression based system against enemy encounters. So one of the things that I've said before in, my weekly blog videos, and I'm sure many of you could probably, say it as well, is that the modifiers don't really feel impactful. So the modifiers don't really feel impactful. There's an element they're missing from your encounters, right? So if they can kind of make modifiers feel more impactful, make you kind of gear up a certain way, make you use certain gear for different encounters, like you can really start to develop builds that are encounter specific instead of developing builds that are game specific, if you know what I'm saying, right? Because right now it feels like there's builds that are definitely more so like I'm just gonna wipe everything out. But if you can start, tailoring, different encounters with different things that are happening, and then on the loot side, you give us tools that kind of help us deal with these modifiers, help us deal with these encounters, help us deal with different things that you throw at us in a mission, for example. Then we can really start to kind of look at loot in a different way. But it does seem like they got to take encounters and loot and kind of merge them together in a more cohesive way than what they're doing now. And this is kind of what I'm understanding from this answer. So if this is something that they're working on in the future, hopefully this is a part of that loot rework that we've heard a little bit about, that they're going to look at loot and kind of rework it and change some things. So I hope in the future we do get that cohesive kind of marriage between villain encounter, modifiers, and loot and different modifiers, and everything just kind of comes together in a nice little ecosystem. So this answer definitely gives me hope for obviously the next wave of like superhero and supervillain encounters, maybe some modifiers and the loot changes. So this was a really good answer here personally, just for me. So yeah, this was great. This was great. All right, so the next question. Thanks for your work on the game. We know the team is very dedicated. My question is, what type of combat is usually more fun to design? Aerial or ground-based? Horizontal or vertical? Vince answers, I haven't really thought about that much. I will say that having worked on aerial combat before, I'll admit I might have taken a big breath and a sigh of relief when I wasn't going to have to worry about it on the last project I work on. For Marvel's Avengers, though, I remember one of the first things I thought after being introduced to the game was, well, unmetered and untethered flight is basically as big a nightmare as it gets. But at the same time, as a player, I was pretty excited at the prospect of not skipping when it came to letting Iron Man just hover as long as you want. It would have been really easy and a lot cheaper, frankly, to figure out a way to limit or constrain flight and aerial combat pretty significantly, especially considering it was something that really only factored into 30% of the initial cast. But I'm super glad that we decided not to do that, because I really don't think characters like Iron Man or Thor would feel how you would expect them to feel without the aerial stuff that we did for them. So, while generally I would say ground stuff is more fun to work on because it's just quite frankly a lot cleaner and easier to deal with, I think for Marvel's Avengers specifically, the aerial gameplay was just so different and extreme, I guess, for lack of a better word, that the potential for abilities and gameplay really does feel so different from the ground stuff. It was a lot of fun to go back and forth with the guys on. Okay. All right. All right. So the next question is, hi, Vince. Love the game. I've one gripe from day one, though, and it's a big one. I very much dislike how Hulk can be interrupted by any little projectile while doing his charged heavy attack. It takes me out of the character completely. I'd be okay with him getting interrupted without having rage press, but with rage, just let me rampage without interrupts. So the question is, how did you decide what is and what isn't interruptible? Was this even a consideration when designing the combat? Did the team not feel like Hulk was underpowered compared to what he should feel like, or even compared to Thor? Alright, so Vince answers, hey, I'll cut right to the point. That particular aspect of Hulk is something that was a big topic of debate with the team. Without getting into too much detail over why the decision was made one way or the other, I will say that in general, our biggest worry was giving Hulk too much separation from the rest of the heroes when it came to impact resistance and hit reactions. His rage mechanic, the ability to additively use it and continue attacking while being protected from non-red attacks, was, in a lot of ways, born out of a desire to allow Hulk to essentially rampage without interrupts, but do so in a way that didn't essentially just toss out one of the core elements that makes a melee action game function at a low level, which is the risk/reward of choosing when and how to attack. But with that said, one of the things I'm most grateful for in regards to working on Marvel's Avengers as a whole is that we have the ability to tweak and fix gameplay over time. Like I said, like I think I've mentioned a couple of times today, revisiting the current roster of heroes, not only adding new abilities, skills, and levels, but updating and improving and overhauling their current abilities is something that is absolutely in the cards. I apologize for a bit off topic rambling of sorts. I hope this doesn't come off like I'm dodging the question entirely. Too long don't read. Consistency across heroes versus unique traits was/is one of the biggest challenges for developing the gameplay. And while I'm really proud of where the team ended up overall with our decisions, there are absolutely some decisions that we didn't nail, and we are very fortunate to be in a scenario where we can fix them, even if it takes longer than I like. So, I don't know what to make of this one. So, and let me know what you guys think about Hulk in general, because my understanding of Hulk is that there's things that you can kind of take from the game take from comics and take from movies, but there's still things you have to fit within the structure of the game. And I think I've said this on stream quite a few times that, you know, Hulk is a raging monster, and you can write him in a way in a game, or sorry, in a movie or in comics that really take part in um, that unique monster aspect of Hulk, right? But when it comes to a game, you still have to create a character that doesn't break the game, right? And it sounds like that was the big question that they were having too when it came to the design philosophy of Hulk. So it definitely seems like they definitely sacrificed a little bit of the, the of like putting yourself in Hulk and imagining yourself as you're this giant green rage monster, in order to kind of not break the game of their combat system. It does kind of seem like there is something in the works for Hulk later on. I could be totally misreading this, but it definitely does seem like, if there is enough push from the community on Hulk in a way that they kind of have to respond, they will respond. So if you guys are Hulk mains, or you want Hulk to be in a better spot where he's not being interrupted, or maybe they'll look at doing something with him. I kind of figured this was always the case with Hulk, though. It's a matter of like balancing, the game and balancing, what you've seen in movies and comics, and try to, imagine that works in a game. It's definitely like a tough thing. It's so tough to do. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if anyone's going to be happy with this answer. I mean, I understand it, and then I totally hope that if there's enough push from the community, they definitely go back and change Hulk, or tweak Hulk a little bit. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. I know there's some Hulk players lurking around, so let me know what you guys think of this answer. Let me know what you think of what could be changed for Hulk. And yeah, on to the next one. All right, next question. Awesome. I love these. Thank you for taking the time. Question 1. How did you and your team begin making decisions about how certain characters moved, fight, and so on? What was the process on deciding how Black Widow fights for someone like Miss Marvel? Question 2. Who came up with the really neat concept about Kate co-opting / repurposing aim tech? I've been annoyed by / impressed by the teleporting peacekeepers for a long while, and being able to beat them at their own game sounds very satisfying. Question 3. Who has been your favorite character to design combat for so far? Question 4. What character are you most looking forward to? Thanks again. All right, or at least just number 2 for now. To be completely honest, I'm not entirely sure who the exact person was that came up with the idea. I'll see if I can find out. But I have to say that I'm totally with you. I personally think it was a really cool element for Kate. Working with the Marvel Universe is absolutely amazing, obviously, especially for a long-time comic book nerd like myself. But one of the really cool things when working with some of the newer characters is that Marvel was really very encouraging of us to place our own stamp on the characters and not be afraid to carve out a crystal interpretation for anything that we tackle. Essentially, as long as what we come up with really fits the character and feels true to who they are, Marvel is all for it. So the idea of Kate being resourceful and savvy enough to repurpose tech not only opened up a huge door for us on the gameplay side, but I think narratively, it also just felt right. And whenever gameplay and narrative feel consistent, almost like they're playing off one another, I think it strengthens the result for both. Also, from a gameplay standpoint, it was really important for us to be able to distinguish Kate from Clint as much as possible in a lot of ways. It's tricky, obviously, because at the same time, we really want to sell the mentor / mentee relationship through gameplay as much as possible. We also need to make sure they play and feel very different. Kate's ability to manipulate and pretty much play the battlefield is pretty unmatched, and her repurposed tech is really what gave us the jumping off point from a design side too. I think blend her ranged expertise and melee abilities together in a really meaningful and unique way. So, I mean, I think one of the things I've seen a lot of people say is, they're very worried about Kate and Clint playing very similar to each other. And I think one of the things that I've stressed in my conversations with people is that the one thing that Crystal Dynamics hasn't really messed up on is character design, character animations, character combat. So obviously, the aim tech and, kind of making her this teleporter with different things obviously is going to, give her something unique to herself. While obviously, they're going to have to come up with something to give Clint very much something just for himself. And there'll probably be some blend between the two, obviously. But obviously, I think as we've seen today with a lot of people and their feedback is Kate's pretty badass, which gives me hope that Clint is going to be badass in his own right, but not totally, they're not going to feel like, oh, I'm going to go play Kate, which is just Clint in a different model, or I'm going to go play Clint, which is just Kate in a different model, right? They're going to be very different, but they're going to be very similar at the same time. So I think we're in a good hands here. I think it's definitely going to be fine. But, and I mean, this answer right here kind of sells me on that even more than what I was already thinking. So, great question. Obviously, he only answered number two, but great answer nonetheless. Question is, when the combat system is being created, were all the characters made with numerous builds in mind? For example, the characters all being able to still be viable with precision, might, intrinsic heavy, etc. And could you answer a question about Hulk's running heavy? I love vaulting over enemies, but it not has been useful mid combat as the running shoulder move. Am I just using it wrong? Vince answers, Well, first off, regarding Hulk's heavy sprint with enemies, I will say that's definitely a bit more on the nuanced side than his shoulder ram is. That is to say, it's a bit more situational, I think, than the shoulder ram, which is, to be honest, just really good all around in comparison. His leap slam has more impact, I believe, which means that in certain scenarios you're able to push through enemies' defenses, but especially if it's mid-combat and not as an initiating attack, it makes sense that you're seeing more success with his shoulder ram. In terms of build choices, the answer is yes, definitely. But after we were done working on a first pass design for each of the heroes, we actually went back to each of the heroes individually and talked about what each build type would mean for each of the heroes, because we wanted to make sure that there were elements that made each of the choices more viable. As you obviously know, there are so many different elements to build off of that it's tough to consider a scenario in which all of them are totally equally viable. But the idea is that because you can make choices in the skill tree itself, as well as choices regarding simply how you play the character, the idea was to support players choosing that playstyle, even if it wasn't necessarily as absolutely efficient as another build. That's actually something that is unique to skill-based games when it comes to build choice. What is really often more important is how comfortable or capable a player is with a particular playstyle that actually determines if a particular build choice is viable. So ultimately, that is what was really important to us. So for example, even though Hulk doesn't have the type of range variety and attack options as a hero like Iron Man does, that doesn't mean someone isn't just going to simply be really good at using Hulk's rocks as a ranged weapon on top of the idea of preparing via picking up a rock ahead of time and choosing to use it as a melee or ranged weapon. Or the idea of constantly leveraging enemies as projectiles or melee weapons. So in that case, if a player ended up just gravitating towards that playstyle, we wanted to make sure that the item and progression system supported them as much as possible and allowed them to target a playstyle that might be considered unorthodox. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, makes sense. Makes sense. All right, next one we go. All right, question is, thank you for doing this, Vince. My question relates to Kate and Clint, or Clate, as I just called them. What kind of differences should we expect for combat animations in their kits? Of course, without going into spoiler territory. Vince answers, well, actually, one of the trickiest aspects of working on the Hawkeyes is that we want to simultaneously both reflect the mentor/mentee relationship between the two heroes and at the same time make sure they both stand out on their own. Deciding to tackle two heroes so close together as our first post-release heroes was also something that the combat team knew was going to be an additional challenge, let's say. But after it had been decided that Clint was the obvious choice for the first post-release hero, and that his storyline was going to involve Kate Bishop, it just seemed like too good an opportunity to pass up to be able to deliver a pair of Hawkeyes rather than just one. So, taking everything into account, the timeline, the narrative context between the heroes, their extremely similar ability sets, the combat team decided that what we would do is use the essence of the Hawkeye character, specifically sword and a bow, and treat that as essentially just a really low-level shared element. And then after that, we decided to diverge as much as we possibly could in all directions in order to really deliver a unique playstyle and identity for each. And to be honest, we even began thinking that we would share some elements where it made sense, but then after working on the characters a bit, decided instead to actually push those elements even further. With that said, I don't really know an exact percentage. I can confidently say that pretty much every single move and ability between the two heroes is different to some degree, with almost every melee attack being completely different both in form and function. To each of the characters having access to a bunch of their own unique arrows in addition to having access to maybe 2 or 3 shared arrow types where it makes sense. They have completely different heroics, their own specialization trees, exotic armor sets, the works. I know we've been a little cagey when it comes to letting everyone know exactly how different they are, and to be honest, the main reason was simply because they kept evolving. But TLDR, at this point, I would say there are only a handful of individual moves/animations here or there that are similar in function/form to each other, with the biggest similarity between the two at this point simply being the fact that they both trained with similar weapons. Everything else is very different. I know everyone's been super worried about that. I know I myself at some points have been super worried about that, but it's good to get kind of some confirmation that it's gonna be very different. The characters are gonna be very different from each other. And after seeing, I haven't played Kate myself yet. But after seeing all the excitement around Kate, I'm even now more excited for Clint. This is definitely a great answer, and I would hope that this kind of rests everyone's worries about the status of Clint and what he's going to play like, and it's going to just be two Hawkeyes that are pretty similar. I would say now we kind of understand that they're really going to be different, and I hope that kind of eases everyone's worries. All right, next one it is. All right, so the next question is, are you looking at improving the enemy combat design? If so, what are some areas in which you would want to improve? Answer. We're always looking at improving the gameplay and combat as a whole through both new features, but also improving and cleaning up existing gameplay elements. We actually have a running list of improvements and tuning that we want to work on. I don't have the full list memorized, but it includes everything from finite tuning of enemy recovery timers, attack indicators, collision volumes, hit reaction resistance, how status effects apply. That's pretty much everything, I guess. Well, I mean, that's quite a list. It seems like there's always something to fix. Right now, we're just balancing against new gameplay, and it's obviously a tough balance. Okay. All right. Next question. All right. Question. Hi, Vince. Thank you for doing this. The combat for this game has been a lot of fun for my friends and I. Each character feeling unique from fighting style / technique to moving around the miscellaneous areas. 2 questions. How can we expect in different combat when new baddies / henchmen / bosses are added? Will I have to completely alter my attacking style when going after a bot versus, for example, a monster henchman? In development process, how frequently has something been developed that you thought was extremely cool and shelved because the right fit wasn't there in terms of available heroes currently? So, answer. Thanks, really appreciate that. When it comes to new enemies and bosses we're working on, we're definitely focusing all our efforts towards creating encounters that really offer something new and really justify why we would add them to the game, rather than just creating variety for variety's sake. I say that especially with some of the new bosses we're working on, with Super Adaptoid really being just a starting point, we are really focusing on incentivizing and rewarding meta strategies and really specific playstyles, especially when it comes to the higher tier / multiplayer focused threats, if that makes sense. In terms of the stuff that had to be shelved during development, actually I can't really think of any, but that's really because we focus on each of the characters very specifically. Everything we did for each hero started with the core identity of the hero, and it was something that was constantly considered as we worked on the feature. Did it make sense for the character? Was this something that felt like Thor, etc.? I would say that when a feature didn't really feel like it fit the character, that was one of the first things that would either get it cut or changed, so nothing really got far enough along that we have wanted to use it, but we just didn't have a character for it. But I will say that on the other hand, when working with an IP as massive as Marvel's Avengers, it's hard not to consider how certain mechanics could apply to upcoming characters, and there were definitely dozens of times where certain design conversation would somehow magically warp into the specific design for a character we weren't able to work on yet, and we'd eventually have to come back to reality and realize we should probably keep on track. So one of the things I said many weeks ago is that I don't like theorizing, because you play with the what ifs instead of the what ares. And it sounds like, even the development team definitely played with a lot of the what ifs instead of the what ares. So they're doing it just like we are sometimes, guys. Definitely interesting to get a kind of a viewpoint into the development process right there. All right, next question. Love the combat system. It's one of, if not the thing that I love most about the game. What was your inspiration and thought process when designing the combat style of Captain America and Iron Man? They both feel so fluid and true to form that it's almost unreal, and it feels and looks exactly the way they should be. From the basic combat to the abilities, everything is spot on. The way that Cap throws his punches, fires his shield, and even the way he walks and runs. The way Iron Man throws his punches and the movement when using the repulsors during combat, it's perfect and could not have been done any better. I would love to know what your inspiration and thought process were, and what you thought these characters needed to feel as authentic as possible when it comes to their movement and style in combat. Cheers. So the answer is, hey, I just have to say that's really satisfying to hear, and I can't wait to pass on this feedback to Jeff, Brandon, Tracy, AJ, and all the amazing animators that the combat team worked with hand in hand to try and pull off exactly what you're talking about. As you might imagine, we actually spent a considerable amount of time and energy researching exactly the kind of stuff you're talking about. And just an example of what that means in practice is that before a motion capture shoot, we go through and create a massive amount of very specific reference, which can even include cell phone video captures of ourselves doing certain specific poses, or you having our animators hop into suits themselves to try and target something really specific. And then when it comes to actually doing the motion capture suit, it means working with the actor for each shoot, pulling up reference for them, reviewing and critiquing every pose and motion as they're doing it, bugging them to do it over again, try it a different way, etc. And then, of course, once we get the move in the game and we're messing with the timing and feel in the presentation, there was a lot of going back and forth over a lot of tiny minutia in order to get some of those exact poses just right. I know it's a little tired at this point, but really having so many years of Marvel reference and lore means that as long as you're willing to do your homework, and because we have so many people who care about these characters and really love them, there is such a great starting point. One thing I'll say too, just having worked on character-driven action games for a long time, is that one of the most important things I learned over the years is that even through gameplay, it's more important to be selling the core identity of the characters, even if it means tweaking the mechanics to fit the character, as opposed to what may seem more intuitive, which is to consider the gameplay over narrative. Because you could have the most awesome combat move in the world, but at the end of the day, the ultimate goal of the experience is about selling the fantasy of the character. So if it doesn't fit quite right, it doesn't matter how great it might be otherwise. We're extremely rigorous with that approach on every hero we worked on, which is why it's so great to hear feedback like this. Okay, all right, that's a great answer. I mean, it's definitely like obviously a little bit of game, comics, and movies. How do you kind of bridge those together, right? It's definitely interesting to get an insight on how they do that stuff. So really great, really enjoyed it. Really great answers again. So on to the next one. All right, question. Thank you for doing this. My question is, how much does the difficulty of implementing a character's skill set influence the likelihood of them being in the game? Take Hawkeye and Kate, for example, whose mechanics I imagine weren't that challenging considering, and this is mostly guesswork, that a lot of their aiming mechanics and such already have a groundwork in mechanics already implemented, such as Iron Man's weapons, whereas implementing a character like Quicksilver or Scarlet Witch would make a more challenging to design. Thanks again. To be honest, it doesn't really factor in at all. In fact, when you're working with a roster like Marvel's Avengers, it's impossible not to talk about how we might approach all sorts of heroes that we haven't had the opportunity to work on yet. Whenever I see the fan skill set posts on Reddit, I always laugh because it's pretty much exactly what we do. But even though I can see how it might seem efficient or intuitive to go after the characters like you're talking about, especially when a studio has a certain affinity for bows, I guess you could say, but to be honest, it really is driven more by high-level discussions over the direction of the story and the game and what heroes make sense to bring in. And as you could imagine, there is no shortage of ideas and thoughts all the way up the chain. Now that I think about it, it's kind of quaint to think that anyone would consider how challenging it might be for the polo combat team to manage. But no, in all seriousness, every character is challenging in their own way to really get right, regardless of how simple or intuitive it may seem. I realize that might not sound right, but it's definitely true, at least in my experience. All right, on to the next one. All right, question. What are your top priorities in improving and expanding upon the combat system? Answer. That's a pretty simple and complicated question at the same time. I guess from my perspective, expanding the game in a way that adds more for every character on top of also providing new heroes is one of the major goals, but that's really in addition to also streamlining and refining everything that we can along the way, especially when it comes to the upcoming next generation release. There's still a lot to gain from refining what's there before we even talk about adding anything, but fortunately, we have the resources to do both, so we're really working right now to find that right balance. I think in terms of specifics, enemy interactions and more advanced encounter mechanics is probably the most accurate, but fancy sounding words that I think would describe some of the driving goals, if that makes sense. Okay. All right, on to the next. All right, next one. Hi, Vince. Thanks for the AMA. The heroes in this game all feel really great to play, and I love how you guys took inspiration from their various media representations. I noticed several moves which bear a strong resemblance to attacks in the Marvel vs. Capcom series. For instance, Stars and Stripes and Gamma Wave are examples. And I like how the personality of the heroes come through in both their attacks and their voice lines. Tony has some good ones. My question is, are there any plans to bring that same level of personality and flair to the enemies? Right now, a lot of the enemies can feel robotic, for a lack of a better word. I know they're robots, but bear with me. Comparing Sentinel in Marvel vs. Capcom and Adaptoids in this game, Sentinel has a lot more flair and personality with his attacks and voice lines, while the Adaptoids are pretty mute. Appreciate that. Obviously, we're not just fans of all things Marvel, but of other games and iterations of these characters. And taking inspiration or reference where you can get it is pretty crucial to the game development, I found. In terms of really pushing on the enemies, as you described, that's definitely one of our major initiatives going forward, both in terms of really delivering the same level of depth and attention to enemies and villains, but also really digging into Marvel's Avengers lore to go after iconic villains and enemies in the same way we go after delivering the heroes. It's definitely a good point of feedback, and it's something that we're not only working on, but really felt personally as well. All right, cool. That's really good. I hope, obviously, definitely one of the things is that when you're playing a Marvel game, there's so many villains that you can pick from, and you really hope that the villains have a little bit of personality as well. So to kind of read that, for lack of a better term, to hear that obviously is really good. So we'll kind of see how that kind of manifests itself moving forward. On to the next. All right, 2 questions. First one. Will consistency be addressed in the timing windows of dodging enemy attacks? The actual appearance of the dodge icon above different enemies' heads all have deceptive and inconsistent timing as to when exactly to dodge. Question 2. There have been videos posted where getting hit once leads to recovery animation, then into a long chain of getting hit further during your recovery animations until death with no ability to react. Will this be addressed as well? So I'm pretty sure this is the stun lock that was answered earlier, right? So let's see what he says. In short, yes, attack timing and collision windows are, as well as attack indicator timing and consistency, is something we're working on both from a design standpoint, but also from a technical / scripting standpoint, as we've unfortunately run into the issues on a few fronts. It's one of the things that drive us crazy the most as players and something we're anxiously addressing. As frustrating as I know is for players to have to go through the effort to make videos to communicate this kind of stuff, it honestly is a really useful tool for us to leverage and helps get our attention and focus. Okay, so it is something they're going to address. Obviously, can't really give a timeline, but it is something they're actively looking at and looking to fix. Okay, cool. On to the next. All right, next question. Greetings, Vince. Here are my questions for you. Will there be finishers with environment interactions? How much does it take to animate a finisher? Are we going to see a valuable amount of new finishers in the future, or will we have around 5 per hero as it is now? Thanks. All right. Answer. Finishers are one area that I personally feel like we just weren't able to expand and flesh out enough before shipping. There are always things like that in development, but one of the great things about ongoing experience like Marvel's Avengers is that we have the opportunity to go back and revisit things like this. In terms of environmental interactions, it's really tough in a game as massive in scope and scale as Marvel's Avengers to do this kind of stuff, simply because of the infinite number of conditions. With that said, exploring ways that we still pull it off is definitely something worth looking into. It can take anywhere from several days to a week to animate a finisher. It all honestly depends on a bunch of factors like how strong is the motion capture performance, what kind of elements or interactions between the two characters are involved. But honestly, the biggest time sink I find is that the best finishers tend to feature something that just can't happen in normal gameplay. So you aren't seeing something that you could have done yourself, so honestly a lot of the time can be spent finding the exact performance that's worth tuning or turning into a finisher, or tweaking one until it gets to that point. If it was just a matter of manufacturing animations, it can be done a lot quicker. I think it's also safe to say that we want to expand the amount as well, but to be honest, I don't think anyone has talked about an exact count. Just definitely more than 5. Okay, cool. All right, next one. What is the difference between blue and yellow dodge indicators? Why do some weaker enemies not flinch during their attack animation while you're hitting them? But they flinch if they're not in the middle of an attack animation, which is confusing once they begin their attack and you can't interrupt them even with blue/yellow dodge indicators. Answer. Blue means that the attack is blockable and parryable under circumstances and no special timing is required to defend against them. Yellow means that it requires precision timing in order to counter/block it, and that a late or static block results in a block break. You can think of it like blue is blockable, yellow is block break, except precision timing beats a block break. The thing that determines if an enemy will flinch an attack or not is essentially their impact resistance, which checks against the impact of an incoming player attack to determine what reaction, if any, will ultimately play. The simple answer is that when enemies are attacking, they gain impact resistance, generally relative to the tier/color of attack type. When enemies aren't attacking, they may have higher impact resistance by default, especially they're a much higher power level, but all impact resistance is additive/applied on top of each other. So if an enemy is heavily resilient simply by default, when they're attacking, they will become even more resilient. It's one of the systems that I would love to make a lot more clear. What is your main priority when designing a hero's kit? Do you look at the role you want the character to fit, or is accurately representing comics your first priority? It's a little bit both, if I'm being completely honest. At the end of the day, obviously it doesn't make sense to make Captain America something he isn't, but that doesn't mean there can't be a spirited debate over exactly how that can be translated to a gameplay role or design. There are some obvious/intuitive translations that probably pop up at a first glance for a lot of heroes, but one thing that's great about working with characters that have so much depth and nuance is that it's really easy to make a compelling argument sometimes when you want to steer how their abilities and role might translate in gameplay, if that makes sense. Okay. Makes sense to me. Next one. All right, question. Did you guys ever play around with Cap wielding Mjolnir? That'd be a lot of fun, especially if you still combine the shield as well in some ways. I'd love to hear about any funny glitches that stuck out in your head during development. Black Widow accidentally picking up rocks like Hulk. Texture goofiness. Was any character particularly susceptible to funny moments? So this is the answer. I can't think of anything super funny right now, but the one glitch that stuck out to me most in development is that when I first got on the team and was looking at Hulk, he had an ability that would temporarily pick up and discard an enemy. If you accidentally fat-fingered the inputs, like I do a lot, you would go into a debug state and keep the enemy held. The first time I did this, I noticed that him holding the enemy looked pretty good, and I had to ask the guys what the heck was going on. It was explained to me that they had explored the idea of holding them at one point, and it had been tabled, and what I was seeing was some leftover artifact. That lasted a few months before I talked with Sun, the designer who would have to manage the insanity of an additive grab system, what he thought about just going for it. Once he agreed, we basically said, well, let's go ahead and make that bug a feature again, and that's pretty much how we ended up with Hulk grabbing and tossing enemies around. I think I mentioned in another answer that is still one of the things that impressed me most about the team and tools at Crystal. Cool. Never answered the cap one, though. Interesting. All right, next one. All right, question. On Black Widow, when she's overcharged and you press heavy attack, she uses a smoke grenade and goes invisible and drains the intrinsic meter. If she's not overcharged, not sure if overcharge is the right term, she uses an otherwise normal grenade attack. Why does the smoke grenade exist? The option to run a third battery effect on that grenade is huge without the smoke grenade ability. I'll be tearing through 20 enemies all at once and thinking I'm about to hit these fools with this cryonade, but she suddenly goes invisible. Wait, what the? Aw, damn it, my meter was full. Arrgh. Again, why does the smoke grenade exist? I'll admit, it was definitely a bit experimental for us to put the kind of a significant ability charge on our core loop like that. The idea was to really highlight the in and out of stealth play. With that said, the ability to customize heroes' movesets in a way that allows players more freedom to configure/toggle abilities is something I would love for us to look into. Okay, cool. All right, next one. Question. Is there ever going to be more insensitive to having long combo strings like the increased speed in Arkham or the focus/venom meters on Spider-Man? Because at the moment, there doesn't seem like there's much reward for long combos. Answer. There isn't anything on the near horizon, but that type of metagame element is something we have definitely talked about and looked into at various times. One of the issues that makes something like a traditional combo string difficult to pursue in a game like Marvel's Avengers is, well, multiplayer. It requires a lot of tricks to, I think, really get the type of desired effect. But with that being said, the effect that it does get is something that I think would still be something worth pursuing. Okay, cool. All right. It's a cool answer. Definitely for people who want to do long combos and, kind of want to be flashy about it. Maybe we'll get something, Interesting. I think when we get around to Spider-Man, maybe that's something they'll kind of revisit on the in the development of Spider-Man. Because one of the things that they're probably going to do, in my opinion, is take inspiration from 2018 and even now Miles Morales. How can't you, right? They definitely said they take inspiration, they take reference. So I definitely see that happening, which means that something like this will probably be looked at again closer to the time Spider-Man gets into, kind of motion capture and animation and all sorts of stuff like that. So great question, great answer. Why did you guys decide to change which attacks can be parried depending on challenge level? The parry mechanic is really fun, but it's not something you can really use in higher difficulty. Shouldn't it be a mechanic that players should master for harder missions? Not only that, but again, use to parry might even get you killed if you try to parry something out of muscle memory in a higher challenge, and that attack is now a red one. Also, I never really understood the difference between yellow and blue/white attacks. What changes between them? I don't think it was ever explained in the game. I'm sorry if it has. I might have missed it. Well, to be honest, we had actually intended to tweak the scaling of those attacks on a difficulty basis on an attack-by-attack basis for the exact reason you mentioned. In a recent patch, actually, a first pass went in that hoped to address this because, in short, I completely agree with you. You're right. It's something I still don't think we've gone right, and it's definitely part of the enemy improvement list I've mentioned a couple of times. Also, blue/white on some monitors equal fully blockable, yellow equal block break, but has to be parried. Sorry for the abrupt explanation, but if this AMA has made anything even more clear to me, it's that we need to do a better job of communicating and defining these types of mechanics. Okay, cool. All right, question. Is there any chance that we can get an after-action report that details how much damage we have done throughout the mission, and also how much boss damage we have done? It could also include things like status damage and stunned enemies, etc. How many crits were generated? This would really help us test out build concepts and further understand how the attributes and the numbers associated with them work. At the risk of getting in trouble here, we actually had something like this in development. We pulled back on it for a variety of reasons, unfortunately, some of which just being the time it takes to make sure that the reporting is accurate. It makes sense and is usable for the exact kind of stuff you're talking about. I do know that it's something that has come up again recently as something that would be great to finish/pursue again. So, Vince answers, at the risk of getting in trouble here, we actually had something like this in development. We pulled back on it for a variety of reasons, unfortunately, some of which just being the time it takes to make sure that the reporting is accurate, it makes sense, and it's usable for the exact kind of stuff you're talking about. I do know that it's something that's come up again recently, something that would be great to finish/pursue again. Yeah, I think any sort of information that you can have when it comes to, kind of the numbers you're putting out and any sort of information like that could definitely really help when it comes to like build videos. One of the things that I really enjoy is when there's like dummies in like social spaces or like your base of operations or whatever game you play. DPS dummies, you basically go and you work out your combo strings and you work out your rotation, and you can just kind of see what your max damage output is. Anything like that, even even if they put like a DPS dummy and then it gave you like, you do a combo and then like your damage comes up on the side, like, hey, you did this much damage to the dummy. I mean, even something like that would be good too, right? But then you're not taking into account like different status effects that different bosses have, or maybe you can customize it even. So if they give you a DPS dummy, you can customize the DPS dummy. You can put like certain amount of health on it. You can do so much stuff with it. I think that could even just be as good as an after action report, maybe. So maybe that's a different way to kind of take that in that direction. So they could even call it like, they could put it in the harm training room or whatever they want to do with it. Something like that would definitely be pretty cool. On to the next one. All right, question. Could we ever get a deep dive revealing damage multipliers, like how much basic attacks do, then how much the battery effect damage changes, all of that? Some real D specifics in how the numbers work. Actually, so this is the answer. Actually, overhauling the attributes and statistics/skills descriptions in a manner that would expose some of this information is something I personally hoped was going to make the initial list, but was pushed back for a post-release update. So the short answer is that I hope so. So looks like it could be coming. We don't know. I mean, it was pushed back for a post-release update. So, I mean, this sounds like it's on a list somewhere to get done. Hopefully it does. I mean, like I said, any sort of transparency, more numbers, more data, definitely can help the players in a lot of ways. So would like to see something like that come. Next one. Can you explain the impact system and how when it comes into play in the combat? Answer. Sure. And I think, like I mentioned in another comment, it's something that we're hoping to make more clear and expand on in the future. But the general gist is every enemy has an impact resistance value that will determine if they react and attack, and what reaction they'll play. Player attacks then have an impact rating that simply gets tested against the enemy's impact resistance for the final value. So if a player hero attack is 100, let's say, and an enemy has a 100 resistance for whatever reason, maybe they're in a red attack, for example, then 100 minus 100 becomes 0, and the attack is treated cleanly/plays as if nothing was affecting it. But if say the player attack is only 50, then the result is negative 50, which means that the enemy is an advantage and that they may or not flinch through the attack. Or if say the attack was going to cause a massive flyback, it might get reduced to a stagger. It gets a little more nuanced when it comes to enemies that have default resistance just inherently, or higher classes of enemies that effectively start at a higher tier of resistance and don't really have an ultra low tier of reactions. But that is pretty much how it works. And to be honest, it's sort of a system that I've used in the past and has been adapted, but still has some growing pains when it comes to the game as massive in scale and scope as Marvel's Avengers. So like a lot of combat stuff, I like to think of it still as a work in progress. That just kind of goes over my head. Wow, cool. I mean, obviously, like there's depth to it, and there's stuff that goes on like under the the covers and under the the hood of the engine that we don't really see. But that's interesting. I'm gonna have to like look at this one and just kind of put it in my head. Because like on the surface I get it, but I would really like to go back and play the game and really kind of pinpoint when exactly stuff like this happens. Because I don't think about stuff like this when I play, but now that I see it in writing and I read it and I'm processing it, now that when I go back into the game, I can really start to see when this kind of impacts my game in different scenarios and combat scenarios. So that's really interesting. Okay. All right, next one. All right, next question. Do you have any plans to have a bit more clarity on the mechanics of the game? The battery effect, for example, is a powerful mechanic with 0 introductions in the game. Answer. Yes, in a variety of forms is the short answer. Like you mentioned, and has been made abundantly clear throughout this AMA, there are a lot of mechanics and concepts in the game that we need to do a better job of communicating and defining. So while this is obviously a really simple thing we can quickly address/improve on, to answer your question as a whole, it's definitely something we need to do. All right. All right. All right. Question. Nice job on the design. You nailed the heroes. Got a few ones for you. Which character did you have the most fun designing? I find Black Widow's Intrinsic the most difficult to use to its full potential because even taking a single point of random damage can nullify it, especially when fights are hectic. Oh, he means hectic. It can be hard to build it back. Do you have any plan on making it less punishable? Answer. Is this the fully upgraded version? Yeah. Her intrinsic tuning is one of the areas we're definitely looking at right now, and the risk slash reward of immediate loss, while it's consistent and sort of core to that style of momentum based combat, is definitely something that doesn't always translate the way we want it to in game. Okay. All right. So they're looking at tuning that. Interesting. All right. Next one. All right. Look at this question here. I'd like to ask about the overshield mechanics and how having an overshield that being twice or more of the ordinary health slash willpower value the enemy started with is possibly too strong a defensive buff. So as long as the overshield prevents 80% plus of all crowd control tactics. Some characters such as Captain America cannot crowd control in any way through overshields unless he goes into Brooklyn Brawler Ultimate mode. Others such as Thor can pin almost any foe, overshields or not, unless the foe can't be pinned in the first place. How is this balanced? Second but related question, Jarvis Barrier grants overshield to players when active, but for only 20% of the character's total willpower. But this further devaluates resilience as a stat to stack, as high resilience grants no bonus to Jarvis Barriers. Furthermore, the defense bonus perk on gear when it activates overwrites your character's current damage resistance from resilience stat to instantly make it 60% damage resistance. So that perk also favors resolve. As far as I can tell, resilience is weaker than resolve to begin with, as it scales the defense rating at a lower rate than resolve does. Even if a total defense rating, no matter how you reach it, gives the same effective hit points, the defense boost perks on gear and the Jarvis Barrier perks on gear just widen the gap immensely, making it so that resolve is always better to choose over resilience for defensive purposes. Why should any player take resilience on any gear items when resolve is marginally better out of the box, and with any defense perks at all, or Jarvis Barriers or both, only widen this gap and make resolve far better to stack over resilience? This feels like it needs an adjustment, or as it stands, resilience on a gear item is effectively a dead stat slot when you get it. Thank you so much for your time and attention on this AMA. Answer. So a couple of things. The Jarvis Barrier is specifically meant to give bonus to willpower gain / benefit that attribute. The instant overriding of resistance, though, for the defense perk is actually not the intended behavior and something that, I'll be completely honest, I didn't believe is still occurring / was still active. Beyond potentially a display issue. But I apologize because it's actually not right of it is. And real quick on the character balance, we don't really intend for those type of elements to be balanced, honestly. Using Captain America's shield kickback gives him a massive advantage over Thor's range abilities with Mjolnir, just as a quick counterpoint. But if we tried to make every single aspect of every single character perfectly equal, we'd really risk running into a situation where they all felt really similar to play. The fact that you have to play the characters differently is part of what makes them feel different. With that said, there is an obvious amount of balance required that you're absolutely right is still a work in progress, but like I've mentioned before, the fact that we have the opportunity to do so with Marvel's Avengers would allow us to be able to not just get this kind of feedback, but actually act on it. So trust me, this kind of detail and specific feedback is not only appreciated, it's useful. Okay. I mean, I don't say it's a... I mean, I feel like this guy went into so much detail with his answer. Vince is like, well, the character's supposed to play different, and well, this is kind of broken. Or, maybe it's not supposed to be broken, but if it is, maybe it's a display bug, but, we'll kind of look into it. I mean, yeah, obviously, I hope this guy walks away with this answer and be like, okay, like, that's a fair answer. Because, I mean, he did put a lot of time into asking the question and going into detail and kind of explaining where he's coming from. But obviously, I think for something like this, characters are definitely going to play different. Every character has a different role. Every character has a different kind of, different ability and opportunity to do something different within, different encounters and combat scenarios. So I definitely agree with Vince that you don't want all the characters playing similar, but it definitely lends itself to that some characters can do certain things really well, which can almost make you want to play those characters almost all the time, right? I think everyone has a Thor, except for myself, that, everyone has a Thor just because Thor is so good, right? So I mean, I think one of the things. So the next one is him just saying that he's done. So I'll just give my final thoughts. So final thoughts obviously is that there's a lot here, and there's a lot of things that, I mean, as a player of the game, I didn't take into consideration. But when reading through an AMA like this, it definitely gives me insight and kind of like the discussions and high level, kind of conversations and things that have to go on to kind of make the game and the characters the way they are. It definitely makes me appreciate the work that the characters have put into them and the way the characters have come out. Because I think, like I've said before, if there's one thing most people or all people should agree is that the characters feel really good. The characters are the greatest part of the game, and that they're just really fun to play as. So really kind of hearing from Vince and reading everything Vince had to say about all the characters and combat and all the sort of systems that they worked on was really good. I hope to see more of these in the future, whether it's with whoever else. Any sort of time you get to hear from the devs perspective and kind of get to ask them questions and kind of understand where they're coming from, it's never a bad thing. It's always a good thing. So stuff like this is really good. And yeah, like to see more of these in the future. Let me know what you guys think down below. Let me know what you guys thought of the AMA and all the Kate stuff today. I'm just about to fire up my stream when you guys see this video. I'll be live at twitch.tv/Hyrule playing Kate for the first time tonight. I've not played Kate at all. I've been busy doing videos and watching Manchester United get their ass kicked. I digress. But with that being said, guys, thank you so much for all the love today and all the support moving forward. I will see you guys next time on Assemble. Or, like I said, you can follow me on twitch.tv/Hyruler. And I look forward to seeing you guys in the next time. All right. With that being said, enjoy the rest of your night. Take care. Take it easy. Peace.